It's time for Southern Fried Baseball, presented by College Baseball Central. Hosted by Jake McKeever as he talks everything SEC baseball and more.
Welcome in, College Baseball Central fans. Episode 11 here of our Southern Fried Baseball series. Another two-parter as we kind of wind down the schedule here as we get closer and closer into opening day. As you may notice, if you're on the video feed, I do have a new mic. So my producer, Monty, I finally got that new mic in. So hopefully the audio is a little bit fixed for everybody. Got two great schools coming in today. Two schools that kind of give off similar vibes, if I'm being honest with you. Oklahoma, the newcomers of the SEC, and South Carolina, who has a new coach. So it's almost like they're the newcomers of the SEC. Two exciting teams. Let's go ahead and see where they fall. Obviously, Oklahoma will be first for us here. Oklahoma coming off a season where they won the Big 12. I know that the Big 12 and the SEC are a little bit different talent-wise. It was the first time Oklahoma ever won the Big 12. I was actually in the house when Oklahoma won it against Baylor. They ended up hosting a regional with UConn, Duke, and Oral Roberts. They ended up fighting to the last bit, being the second team in their regional, but UConn eliminated them before they fell to Florida State. Oklahoma last year was a super, super exciting team. They obviously play their brand of quote-unquote chaos, and that is OUS, as they include the letters on that. Similar vibe on this team. A lot of unknowns. But before we jump into roster stuff, let's go ahead and get the other stuff out of the way. From a park standpoint, I have Dale Mitchell Park as number 10th of 11 ahead of Missouri. They did announce some new renovations with it, but when I was up there the last time, it was pretty bare bones, pretty kind of felt 80s-ish. Not very much outfield seating, so it is kind of behind some of those SEC parks, but there are some renovations coming, so excited to kind of see what those renovations look like in person. I know a lot of OU people were kind of complaining about it as they said that, they can't drive the pickup trucks in the outfield. You're in the SEC. You're not going to be able to do that. Everything that is in person, you're going to have to pay for. From a uniform standpoint, OU does have two new ones. In the bottom left is the Crimson Oklahoma and the Cream Sooner. That is Oklahoma's jerseys. I'm sure you're going to be bumping this mic a lot, so sorry if that is distracting to some people. I really like OU's aesthetic. They really kind of play into the OU logo typeface pretty great. It's one of my favorite personal logos in college baseball. I have them in 8th on our uniform rankings ahead of Mississippi State, behind Arkansas. There's really a lot aesthetically that I like. Like I said, I like the white helmets, like the white hats. They do kind of do a camo that I really don't like, but it'll be interesting to see where the Crimson and Cream jerseys kind of fit and which ones they retire. I will say I'm kind of glad that they retired the vest. I didn't think that was one of their best looks. From a scheduling standpoint, here is that schedule for them. They play Lehigh, then they play at Round Rock against Minnesota, Oregon State, and I'm drawing a blank on who the fourth team is. I will be in person to see Oklahoma that game, so really excited to kind of see the Witherspoon brothers as well as a few other people on there. They play Cal State Northridge the week after. Sam Houston comes to the Mitch. And then in SEC play, they get right to it. They go at South Carolina, Mississippi State, at Alabama. LSU at Vandy, they do get at home before going Missouri and Georgia on the road. Ole Miss at home, and then finishing up with Kentucky and obviously that Red River rivalry with Texas. That one is set to be home. I know a few years ago that they kind of flexed it to Arlington. I don't think they're going to do that, as that was kind of a colossal failure. It's a lot to really like from a scheduling standpoint. They also have a midweek with Oklahoma State, midweek with Oral Roberts, who seems to always kind of live to beat them in Oklahoma State. So definitely some intriguing midweeks for them. They play Texas Tech in a midweek, their old Big 12 rival. So a really exciting schedule. It's weird that a lot of their early season schedules, I think, are almost easier than some of their midweeks. The midweeks are definitely going to not be RPI crushers. But from an SEC standpoint, it is one of the easier schedules, as they do get Missouri and Ole Miss, the two teams that are ranked last in our rankings. I'm going to do some kind of schedule rankings to see who has the easiest, who has the hardest based on our power rankings. If I had to guess, I think Oklahoma is probably going to be in one of the easier ones. Moving on into who they are replacing. Obviously, from a lineup standpoint, they're replacing a lot of guys that were off that College World Series team. John Spikerman, Bryce Madron, and Kendall Pettis are all gone. Those are the three outfielders. Michael Snyder, who played first base at times for him last year, he is gone as well. Jackson Nicklaus and Anthony McKenzie are two guys that are moving on as well. From a rotation standpoint, Braden Davis was their Friday guy. Kyson Witherspoon was their Saturday guy when I went and saw him up at Baylor. Sunday, they used a lot of different guys going in, so I didn't really feel comfortable putting a Sunday guy in there. But Easton Carmichael is back. Jackson Willens is back. So a lot to really like from that standpoint going forward. And they're really not replacing a ton when you kind of look at the grand scheme of things. Oklahoma pitching, I have them ranked third behind Arkansas and LSU, ahead of Florida. And I think it all starts with the Witherspoon pins. But before we get into that, they looked tremendous in the fall when all the stuff that I was reading about their fall reports. Obviously, they played McLennan in junior college and they kicked the crap out of them. But in 14 innings, they only allowed 2 runs. Then in all their fall stuff, which was abbreviated to 7 innings, scores were 3-2, 2-1, 2-1. So the pitchers were doing a tremendous job filling up the zone. Again, OU is one of those teams hitting-wise where they're going to bunt, they're going to hit and run, they're going to move the bases. And the pitching staff really limited that. Obviously, they had some catchers behind the plate that I think kind of do a really good job for them, as we'll touch on the lineup here in a second. But from a pitching standpoint, OU, I think, is going to be in some pretty great shape. Like I said, Kyson, he was a reliever starter for him last year, had 17 appearances and 11 starts. He's 6'2". Obviously, he has a almost 2-to-1 walk strikeout ratio. He's really good at kind of bringing that fastball as it does it at 95, uses it about 30% of the time. I think he's got it up to 97 at times. Obviously, he's going to have to work on some of that off speed as the slider. He has a slider and a changeup that he's kind of working on. The slider has a 40% whiff rate, so a lot to really like from him. Then his brother Malachi, obviously, was more of a reliever last year, so he had 21 appearances for him. He kind of struggled with the walk bug a little bit, and I think that's what kind of kept him out of the rotation. Apparently, in the fall, he's really kind of honed that, really pounded the zone, worked on that. He's up to 96 as well. He was out at Team USA, and I know Maiko said he was really impressed with him as well. He's got a power slider, power off-speed pitches that I think is his best pitch. It's really exciting to kind of see what those two are going to do as a 1-2 punch. They're, I think, one of the best 1-2 punches in the country. I know a lot of people that have really good Friday night guys don't really have good Saturday night guys, and guys that have above average Saturday night guys really don't have that Friday night stuff, as we talked about with Georgia, Mississippi State, and even as we'll talk on in South Carolina here. Oklahoma doesn't have that problem. They have a good Friday night guy, and they have a really good Saturday night guy. From there, that third spot is really kind of up in the air. Cade Crossland's a guy that started a bunch in the fall for him. Everything that I read on him is that his fall stuff was looking really, really good. He's from Weatherford, Texas, coming over from a junior college lefty. He's going to be kind of that mid-90s. It's kind of more of a sinker, and then as well as the changeup mix. Jacob Golston is another one that I think has some untapped potential. I know that he kind of reminded me a ton of actually Cam Johnson, who we'll talk about here in a second, where he was a really heralded freshman that was supposed to come in, really dominate the zone, immediately find his way into the rotation. Didn't really work out like that. Only had 2 appearances for him, but he's got tremendous fall. He's worked really, really hard. A lot of the bullpen stuff that I've heard on him is that he kind of had the walk bug a little bit last year. He's completely out of that. So if Golston can kind of get out of that walk bug, it'll be interesting to see how they use them. And then I just touched on it, Cam Johnson coming over from LSU. He's a guy that I kind of project as a midweek starter for him, kind of going to be a project for him. If he excels early in that midweek role, I could see him kind of moving into a Sunday spot. And if he moves into a Sunday spot, because that means he's throwing good, that's nightmare fuel for a lot of these ones. I really like what I saw from Cam Johnson in the fall of 2023. Obviously, again, he kind of had that walk bud, really took his lumps. A lot of people forget that he was a freshman. In a year's time frame, he went from being in a freshman summer circuit, high school circuit, to pitching at LSU in the SEC. And I think that kind of got a little bit of the better for him. I'm excited to kind of see what Skip Johnson does with him going forward, because he has a proven track record of being really, really good with pitchers. So I'm really kind of excited to see what he does. From a bullpen standpoint, obviously, I think Crossland, Golston, or Cam Johnson, one of them is going to be first out of the bullpen, kind of that guy that eats innings for him. As you know, there's 3 guys for 2 spots. But from the back end of the bullpen, Dylan Crooks is the guy really kind of step up to be that closer. I know when they went on that run to Omaha, that was a really key to their success, as they had that back end stopper. I think that's what Dylan Crooks is going to be. He's up to 96 with his fastball. He's really kind of working on the 2 pitches too as well. So I'm really excited to kind of see what he does as well. Jamie Hitt's another guy, is kind of a long shot dark horse to really come in and carve out a really, really great role, kind of like Cade Horton did back in 2023. He's had a tremendous fall too as well. So I'm really excited to kind of see what he does going forward. And then the last pitcher I'll touch on here is Gavin Jones. He's another junior college transfer. So, take all these stats with a little bit of a grain of salt. Sub-2 ERA, had Skip Johnson said had the best fall of any pitcher on the staff. He's up to 96, as well as kind of a slider mix as well. He's feeling really good about his changeup going forward. There was a little bit of a risk of him going to the draft. Obviously, if anytime you steal JUCO guys from the draft, it means that they're pretty legit. I'm really excited to kind of see what those go in. So that is the Oklahoma staff at kind of a high level one. I think the Witherspoon twins, Oklahoma is going to go as far as they can take them. But the flip side of that is I think if they have any of these pitchers kind of struggle, God forbid, hopefully none of them do, they have a ton of depth from starting pitching standpoint. They have a lot of guys that can throw 5, 6, 7 innings, and Oklahoma is going to do a great job shortening a lot of these weekends. I really do think it's going to be a fight on the mound just because a lot of these guys are so good at getting outs. That's what we saw in the fall is, you had to really extend some of these outings just so guys could get innings because, I mean, there were just guys pumping it in the zone. Like we kind of mentioned, I think that the one that really kind of shows you a lot is Kyson and Malachi pitched game 1. Cam Johnson and Cade Crosslander, who pitched game 2, they really went head-to-head. Again, that was the score where it was 2-1. And I think both of the runs that were allowed were later in. Obviously, I think Crossland has a little bit of an edge up on Cam Johnson. But again, Cam Johnson has the higher ceiling. So that's going to be something to track from a pitching standpoint. Moving on into that lineup as I kind of remove it here for a second, just because this graphic kind of looks a little bit weird. OU has a little bit of an unknown aspect to it. There are a few things that obviously, guys are going to play certain places. You just really don't know where they're going to fit. I think that kind of starts with the catching position. Easton Carmichael and Scott Mudler are both guys that caught meaningful innings for this Oklahoma Sooners team. They both do things tremendously well. I think either guy could be, an all SEC type player. Easton Carmichael, obviously, he's top 5 in hits for returning players. Tremendous talent. His kind of Achilles heel last year was his defense, but he's apparently worked his ass off in the summer and in the fall. He threw a guy out in the fall game. He appears to kind of almost be a plus defender, where last year he was a liability and is really pushing hard for playing time. I could behind the plate. I think that kind of speaks to the volume because Scott Mudler is a tremendous defensive catcher. He's got an absolute cannon. When I went to look for hitting highlights on Scott Mudler for reference, it was just videos of him throwing guys out in games. And if you can limit the run game in the SEC, there aren't a ton of teams that really run, but it's always kind of good to, make guys play station to station. And Scott Mudler absolutely has that cannon of an arm. He's a lefty bat. Carmichael is a righty, has tremendous pop. I think Carmichael's a little bit better of a hitter. It really wouldn't surprise me to see him play first. Again, defense is very much improved. If Carmichael ends up winning that job to be the catcher, or they end up using him as a DH, Braden Horton is who I project to kind of play first. He has really sneaky pop. When you watch him hit, he really doesn't seem like he would have a ton of pop, and he hit double-digit home runs for Liberty last year. Strikeouts were a little bit too high for an OU kind of Skip Johnson one, so I expect him to kind of cut down on those strikeouts if he expects to be in the lineup. But again, this is an OU team. The theme is going to be that they're going to be searching for pop. It's going to be really hard to kind of turn double-digit guys away with the lineup that you have. So I do expect Braden Horton to get very meaningful at bats, if not start at first base. Moving on to the second, I think that one's going to be Kyle Branch. He's really separated himself from all the false stuff that I read. He started in that game against McClendon at second base as a true freshman. He has a super quick release when you watch him take ground balls. I watched some of his perfect game stuff, so I assume that it's gotten a little bit better in the last year since he's been in a college program with that. But he absolutely looks the part of a second baseman. He absolutely looks the part of a shortstop. Again, the videos that I saw were at short, but he definitely got rid of the ball quick. And on the ones to the glove side, he had really tremendous footwork. So really no drop off from a defensive standpoint. That's the kind of team that OU likes to play. You might know his brother, Colby Branch, who's at Georgia. I expect Kyle Branch to have a huge freshman year. I expect his name to be in a lot with the other SEC freshmen that we've talked about. He seems to be a favorite to be an all SEC freshman. Obviously, there's going to be guys that kind of come in, but I would expect Kyle Branch's name to be around a lot of SEC freshman talk. Moving over to short, Jackson Wiltz is back. He is another guy who has a really talented brother. Hit 341 in Big 12 play as a freshman for him. Really struggled early on. It's kind of weird that when they were playing these non-Power 5 teams, he really struggled. They used Anthony McKenzie. They used Gregoria, who's now at Texas State. Wiltz ended up winning the job outright. He had a tremendous Big 12 series. And when OU kind of flipped that switch and became an elite team in Big 12 play, he was a big reason why. Obviously, slick fielder. His dad is a coach. His brother, Eli Wiltz, is another guy that's committed to OU. I think he goes to the draft. He had a great summer up at the Cape, playing on the same team as Easton Carmichael. They kind of got a little bit of chemistry there. So when I watched some of the games, they were throwing people out in Falmouth. Excited to see what he does. He reminds me a ton of Corey Seager. Has really, really great balance. There's a home run that I saw that he hit that he just kind of stood up, wasn't falling all over the plate, had tremendous, tremendous balance, elite level pop. I think he's a guy that OU is going to really need to lean on and get a lot of work out of him because I think he's going to go in the draft the first second that he can. He's one of those elite SEC shortstops. I definitely think he's in the top half. Obviously, there's a lot of elite spots in the SEC. I think Wiltz has every argument to be in there with them. I don't know if he's all SEC yet, as I know he really struggled early. But if he can hit like he did in Big 12 play, in SEC play, I don't see any issues with him there. At third base, it's Dawson Wiltz coming over from LSU Ennis or Eunice. I always kind of mispronounce it. I've heard it spelled a few different ways. They were the D2 JUCO national champions. He was a big reason why for that, as he was the D2 JUCO player of the year. 6'5" according to LSUE, 6'4" according to OU. So take whichever one that you want with a grain of salt. He's built like an absolute twig, as I think he's about 180 pounds wet. He's a switch. He's a really talented right-handed hitter that absolutely mashes. Hit over 340 at a JUCO level. Again, I mentioned he was the conference player or the JUCO player of the year last year. For a guy that's 6'5", he really gets rid of the ball quick. He almost has that kind of second base type body. He played shortstop for LSUE. As he makes the move over to third, I think that'll be a really natural position for him. He's going to be a high contact guy, not really a power guy, as he only had 4 home runs, but I think he's going to be one that puts the ball in play, somebody that bunts, somebody that hit and runs a lot. I'm really kind of excited to see what Dawson Wiltz does. Obviously, if he can make that transition from JUCO D2 to SEC, I think that'll be the really good testament to what Skip Johnson does as a coach. At least early on, he has won the job at third base. Moving on into the outfield, center fielder, I think that one's pretty much locked up. Jason Walk, switch hitter, sophomore shortstop who moved into the center field position, batted leadoff for him, had a hit, just a lightning rod type speed, 6'2", 40 in high school. Obviously, it's high school, so take it with a little bit of grain of salt. He's a switch hitter, does a ton of the little things right. It's going to be really hard to kind of get balls, as though you has a sneaky big park. I'm really excited to kind of see what Jason Walk does. He's won the job outright. Left field, Dason Harris, I do apologize for the name. I think he's somebody that can kind of play right or play left. He's had an absolutely incredible fall, and there was a little bit of a competition with him as well. Only played 6 games for the Sooners last year, but obviously they had some elite outfielders. They're replacing all 3 of them. As a prep, he had a really advanced barrel ability is what I saw. Really good bat-to-ball skills, didn't strike out a ton, had an advanced eye is what a lot of the scouts were saying on him. Ran a 6'4", 60, so he is a fast guy for him. Obviously, I think he's put on a little bit of muscle since he's in high school, so I'm not sure if that 6'4", 60 is accurate, as OU doesn't post their stuff. But he is an athletic guy who can play a corner outfield spot for him as well. Then for that third outfield spot, we have Brandon Kane and Sam Christensen. Sam's coming over from a JUCO who's a high contact guy who can fly. Stole 32 bases for him, really kind of fits into that chaos mold. A lot of bunting, a lot of hit and running on that aspect. And then Brandon Kane is an infielder, outfielder coming over from Mississippi Gulf Community College. Recorded 49 hits, 17 stolen bases, and 5 home runs, batting .360. Again, it is a JUCO, so take it, like I said, with Willis as a grain of salt. But again, I think that it's really interesting that they're going to have that. And then obviously that leaves us with the DH spot. I think that it'll be Mudler and Carmichael kind of switching off too as well. But Skip Johnson has shown in the past that guys can really kind of come out of nowhere, start meaningful games for them. I think that we really get a good understanding of where this team is going to be kind of in that second or third week of SEC play. That's when we'll really know where Oklahoma sits. One freshman that I do want to mention that's had a really, really good fall and is kind of pushing for playing time. I don't think he's going to be there yet, but Drew Dickerson, I expect him to play a lot of meaningful innings for OU going forward, maybe in the midweeks as well. But there's a lot to really like about this Oklahoma Center team. As we kind of close it out here on their lineup, here is where we have them from a talent metric standpoint. We have them as 8th. Good news, Sooner fans, 8th in the SEC gets you as a fringe host. If they end up staying there, I know that we have a few more teams that are probably going to kick them down a few notches. But if you can kind of stay in that range, I mean, for reference, they had 5 SEC teams that hosted. Mississippi State is a 6, really was a snub. So it really is where you want to stay. So while they are 8th in the SEC, that likely puts them as a fringe top 25 team. I know when College Baseball Central was doing our top 25, I advocated for Oklahoma a tremendous amount. I absolutely love the pitching staff. Here is the bell curve for Oklahoma that I have. Far right, obviously, I think their peak is Omaha. I'm not sure that they have the talent hitting wise to win it, as we kind of see that teams that get into Omaha really struggle. Their bell curve, where I think that their variance is going to sit, is a 2 seed. I think they're going to be a very, very dangerous 2 seed that goes into like a Big 12. I could see an Oklahoma State hosting a regional with Oklahoma being the 2 seed, like we saw with Texas A&M and Texas for so many years, and then just wreaking havoc on Oklahoma State. Far left is obviously missing the tournament. There's a lot of unknowns with this lineup going forward that really doesn't make it feel like they're a lock like some of the other teams that we'll talk about here. But that, I think, is kind of a nightmare. I keep mentioning it, but Auburn 2024 nightmare scenario. That's where I kind of see them going in. Closing notes on Oklahoma before we move on into South Carolina. I really like one of the Witherspoon brothers being a vote for an All SEC. They really do a lot of things. White, and I think Kyson is kind of going to be the better of the two. It feels weird because they're such dominant pitchers. That's who I project. And then from another All SEC standpoint, Easton Carmichael hits the absolute cover off the ball. Guys who hit 360 and almost have 100 hits in their career, they tend to be very highly voted in SECs. And then Kyle Branch for first team All freshman in the SEC. I think that one almost feels like it's a lock going forward. Obviously, he's going to struggle at times as a freshman. He's going to take his lumps, but I think if he can have a series like Jackson Wolf's had, where he's hitting his stride kind of near the end, it really wouldn't surprise me to see Kyle Branch get a ton of votes and a ton of support as an All SEC second baseman. So that is it for Oklahoma as we move on into South Carolina, as I get some of my notes up here on them. And that is the wrong one. South Carolina, obviously, they are under their first year with Paul Mainieri, instituting a new rule on all SEC stuff. If your coach left last year and is not somewhere in the SEC, I won't be mentioning their name. He who shall remain nameless is now gone. They did retain hitting coach Monty Lee. They did bring in Paul Mainieri. They did bring in Rooney too, as well as the new pitching coach. I'm really excited to kind of see what he goes in and does. South Carolina obviously is going to be replacing a ton, as they lost Cole Messina behind the plate, who was an absolute mainstay. I think the other thing that you really need to mention about the South Carolina team is they lost 3 elite guys to the draft. PJ Morlando was one of the first prep bats taken. He was committed to South Carolina. The younger of the Messina brothers was committed to there as well. It was always understood that both of those were going to get drafted. And then Clark is the third kind of trio of them. None of those got to campus. I think that's kind of the story of the South Carolina team going forward. I would have loved to see all 3 of those guys in colleges. I think they would have been elite guys. But obviously, South Carolina is looking to have a rebound season. They're kind of starting to make incremental changes to get back to Omaha. If you remember, they're the last team that went back-to-back in 2010, 2011. It's almost a new era of South Carolina baseball, and one where they've really kind of struggled to compete. I think Paul Mainieri gets them over the hump, gets them back into where a lot of their fan base thinks that they deserve. I think that they deserve to be a little bit better too as well. But I do have a typo there. So I do have, this is not a tie with Plainsman Park. It is a typo on my end. I do have Founders Park as the 3rd ranked park in the SEC. Well, I personally haven't been to Founders Park. Every single SEC player that I talk to ranks it up there with Baum, with Alex Box, with the Dude. It is a great place to take in a game, from so I've heard. It's on my list of stadiums to get out to, but we do have Founders at 3rd, ahead of Plainsman Park, behind Baum Walker. It'll be interesting to see kind of if they stay there. I think that they will going forward. From a uniform standpoint, I kind of have South Carolina very similar to OU, as they are 9th. I really like the shade of maroon that they use. I absolutely love their kind of quote-unquote Yankee grays. I think that they have the best gray uniform in all of college baseball. Obviously, they're gray pinstripes. I'm a big fan of gray pinstripes. Their home pinstripes, I think, look even Yankee-esque. They have a black jersey. Black and maroon, I think, is one of the most underrated color schemes in the SEC. They are 9th. I think that they'll kind of move up. Obviously, if they can get back to where they were when they were in the College World Series years, I think that that's where they were at their peak. Here is the schedule for South Carolina. They open with Sacred Heart, then Milwaukee comes to town, and then another typo as Clemson, as they do that series as home. They're going to be away, neutral, home. Morehead State is their final non-conference. And then once they get into conference play, it's really, really tough. Newcomer OU, then they go to Baum Walker, home against Tennessee. They go to Mississippi State and to Texas A&M in back-to-back weeks. Ole Miss comes to town, at Kentucky, and then Florida, Auburn at on the road, and LSU to kind of close it off. It is a tough SEC schedule. We talked about how OU got Missouri and Ole Miss. South Carolina only gets one of them. I think that they have really kind of two tough stretches. Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, LSU is a really tough stretch down the back half. Mississippi State and Texas A&M, two absolutely rabid places to go in and play. If South Carolina can win some of these games that they have at home, if they can steal one from Tennessee, steal one from Florida, and win those series, I think that that's going to go an absolutely long way. They're going to have, like everybody in the SEC, a ridiculously high RPI. So there's a lot to really like from a scheduling standpoint. Here is the South Carolina roster from when James Madison eliminated them. Austin Breiling is gone for him. Blake Jackson's back. Obviously, I mentioned Cole Messina is gone. Parker Nolan, and then Dylan Brewer at first base. So they are replacing a few guys. Ty Good started in that last SEC series for him on Friday. Garrett Gainey was their Saturday guy. And then Dylan Eskew was the Sunday guy. Eskew's back for him, but they are going to be replacing their quote-unquote Friday and Saturday guys. I know Roman Kimball was in that role for a little bit. So South Carolina really did a lot cycling through kind of pitchers and stuff like that. So the good news is they have a lot of guys that have experience. South Carolina pitching, I have them 8th. I have them behind Mississippi State and Georgia and ahead of Kentucky. I think that they have a little bit more depth than Mississippi State and Georgia. They have a lot more unknown than Mississippi State and Georgia. But when I talked to AJ Sessions, who is our South Carolina writer, that's where he kind of ranked them too as well. Starters for him, I have Eli Jerzenbeck coming over. I think he has a tremendous fastball coming off Tommy John. He has a really good curveball and really good command. If you can kind of mirror where he was pre-Tommy John, I think that he can be a Friday night guy. He has Friday night stuff for him. I know that that's really the one thing that South Carolina has lacked in the past few years is a legitimate shutdown Friday night guy. They can get that from Eli Jerzenbeck. That's going to go an absolutely long way for him. Jake McCoy is who I project to be the Saturday guy for him. He's up to 97 with a really good slider and a changeup for him. He absolutely pounds the zone. And then Dylan Eskew started 15 games for him last year, 19 appearances. I think he's kind of the guy that you expect to go in, give up less than 3 runs, pitch 6 innings, just absolutely eat innings. I think he's one that's kind of in the mix for it. Tyler Pitzer is another guy that's kind of in the mix for it too as well. He had a really good freshman campaign and has had a tremendous fall. When I read some of the stuff about Pulmonary, he spoke ad nauseum about Pitzer. I think he's somebody that can kind of be in the mix too as well. Roman Kimball, if he is on and he comes back to where he was pre-injury, I think he's another guy that really has electric stuff. He can be kind of that Friday night guy that everybody expects him to be. It's weird at this time last year, I felt like we were talking about him. Hey, if he can get back to where he was pre-Tommy John, he's going to do some really great things. I think if he can get more to his new normal, pitch with his new arm, pitch with his new arsenal, I think he has a chance to really kind of eat innings for him too as well. Matthew Becker, the stopper, I think he's another one that I think is going to play a very big role. He's got a plus curveball. He's up to 93. He's kind of that hybrid guy is what Maneri said, where, he could be a guy that's first out of the bullpen. He could be a Sunday starter. He could have a chance to close it out when they really need a win. Almost like an Evan Aschenbeck for Texas A&M that was an absolute stopper. I think if Becker can kind of come in, throw some zeros on the board, it'll really kind of make Paul Maneri and Rooney breathe a lot easier. One last name is, I know that I've kind of talked ad nauseum a little bit about him. Wyatt Evans, Jarvis Evans, Ashton Crowther, and Aiden Palmer. 3 of those 4 guys are coming over with Power 5 experience. 2 of them with SEC experience. All of them are left-handed pitchers. All of them are guys that they wouldn't attack during the portal. They really had an issue with bullpen lefty arms, high leverage bullpen guys. They really addressed that pitching staff, and I think that that's a big reason that they're ahead of Kentucky, Missouri, and Alabama, who are really good staffs. Like I said, it is kind of weird to say that they are the 8th best staff in the SEC, but it definitely feels like it's a top 25 staff. So I think that just kind of speaks to how loaded this SEC is this year. Again, I think that they have the potential to really kind of go up. If Roman Kimball can get back to where he was, Eli Jerzenbeck, that's a 1-2 punch that is nightmare fuel, and both those guys are on. Moving on into the projected lineup as I go ahead and remove it here. There's a lot unknown about the South Carolina team from a lineup standpoint. They're still working through their scrimmages. They're still working through a few different things from a catching standpoint. Behind the plate, Talmadge LaCroix and Max Coffer, I think, are in a really tightly contested battle. As when I talked to some people who were at the fall games, Max started one game, Talamad started one game. Paul Maneri talked about, how Talamad was recruited to be a catcher, and he played in the infield for him. And now that was one of the things is they moved him immediately back into catcher. When Maneri went up there and saw him at the Cape, he said both him and Max Coffer look like the best players on the field. Max is obviously a defensive first catcher. He started as an A&M catcher back in 2023 for him. Beat out some really, really talented guys there. Really came into his own, and later in the season was really kind of starting to hit the ball well in 2023. 2024, he gets in a highly, highly competitive battle in the fall. Ultimately loses it to Jackson Appel, who ended up being an all SEC catcher ahead of Cole Messina. A lot of people forget that Coffer really was right in the mix there to win that job at Texas A&M. It wasn't an absolutely guarantee like some of these other jobs that we have seen. I think that Coffer is going to play some significant time for them too as well. And then freshman Banks, I think as he kind of grows up and matures a little bit, I could see him kind of breaking into the lineup. It'll be interesting to see if Max Coffer ends up winning that job over Talmadge LaCroix, if he moves back into the field, if he's kind of used as the backup catcher. A lot of speculation too as well, but a really, really tightly contested battle. And whoever wins it, I think is going to be really, really set up well to succeed in the SEC. First base seems like it's an absolute filler for him. You could see Banks being there. I know that he mentioned Petrie. It's weird. He mentioned Petrie in the outfield, but then he named 3 outfielders that he said are almost guaranteed to start. So it feels like Petrie could kind of be in there. Will Tippett could kind of play there too as well. It's weird. And a lot of the false stuff that I said, it said that Will Tippett and Kazmir were highly competitive, and then Kazmir ended up just separating himself. Tippett, from what I've heard, is just the ultimate teammate. He's a guy that you absolutely want to root for. Big, big glue guy. Like I said, when he was in that one with Kazmir, he was pushing Kazmir to be better, and it was weird. Maneri said it almost didn't feel like they were in competition. It felt like he was coaching him, and that speaks to the kind of teammate that he is too as well. Again, I think that there's a lot of other guys. If some of these other infielders really don't take a step forward, we could see them. Second base, I think that I could see Will Tippett playing there as Nolan Naraki kind of works back from that injury. I think when Nolan Naraki gets to 100%, even when he gets to about 70%, he's going to win that job outright for him. Gaskin is another guy that's really kind of competed with Naraki. I know that he's kind of been that injury guy. I could see one of them playing third too as well, as that's where Naraki played. He was a DH and third baseman for Clemson last year. He seems to be locked in, though, at second base too as well. He's a guy that brings really, really big upside to them. He's a guy that tears the absolute cover off the ball. Really kind of a gritty, old school baseball player, baseball family. I really like Nolan Naraki to kind of take up and take that big step forward. Like I said, one of the best athletes on the team is what Clemson said about him last year. Hit 264 with 4 home runs, played third in DH. Third base, KJ Scobie is a guy that Paul Maneri is really, really high on. He's an advanced hitter with excellent bat-to-ball skills, whose power will come as he adds muscle to an already fairly physical 6'2", 190 frame. Looks the part as a middle-order bat of the future. That's what I got from Paul Maneri's quote. Like I said, he's another guy who's a high school shortstop. I think he's really done a tremendous job at the fall. I think that that's a big reason why they wanted to move LaCroix behind the plate, was to have him at third base. I'm really excited to kind of see what he does. Obviously, he's going to struggle. He's going to have his freshman moments. If Paul Maneri can kind of trust him and stick with him, I think that that's going to do wonders for them. And anytime you're starting freshman, it usually means one of two things. One, that a guy's really, really elite. Two, that you have a hole. South Carolina definitely doesn't have a hole. Scobie is just really, really that elite. Shortstop, like I already mentioned, Henry Kazmir coming over. He's somebody that I would really encourage you, if you're not a fan of South Carolina, or even if you are, learn the name from him. He was great at Ohio State. When I watched Ohio State stuff last year, and as I was kind of prepping this video, his bat absolutely stands out. He hit 320 for him, 72 hits and 53 runs. He was named by D1 as one of the top 50 shortstops for him. Really, really high from a drafting standpoint too as well. I'm really excited to kind of see Kazmir take that step from Big Ten baseball into SEC baseball. He's somebody that I expect to be middle of the order, top of the order for this team. Absolutely rakes, elite approach, really good frame. He looks like a shortstop. And anytime you have some of these guys, it's like, okay, they played shortstop. The actual shortstop tends to be really, really good. It's one of the points of it. But Will Tippett's another one. Mr. Everywhere. He can play anywhere. Great teammate. He could play third if Scobie kind of does. He could play first. He can play second. Will Tippett, I think, is going to play somewhere on this team. Just really kind of a gritty gritty player. Then in the outfield, like I already mentioned, Ethan Petrie played right field or left field for him. He can play third. He can play first. Paul Mainieri mentioned all three of those positions. So it's really interesting to see kind of where he does with him. Ethan Petrie is probably one of the better players in South Carolina history. He's one of the best players in the SEC this year. He hits the absolute cover off the ball. The defense, I think, needed a little bit of work, but I think that that's going to come with comfortability, as he's always been an outfielder. And when he moved over to first, there were some issues, but the bat, I think, is the best bat in the SEC. I think he has every argument to be up there with some of the elite bats. I think he's going to push for SEC Player of the Year. He's up there with like Irish, Jace Lavalette. I'm really excited to kind of see another year of Ethan Petrie, see how he progresses from a batting standpoint, matures at the plate. I can be honest, I don't know how he matures at the plate. He just has that good of an approach. It seems like it's a guy that South Carolina is going to look back on as, yeah, I remember when we had Ethan Petrie, that's how good of a player he is. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit of a matchmaking with him and some of the other corner outfielder spots. Kennedy Jones and Blake Jackson, I think, can kind of step up and be those. Kennedy's had a really, really good fall for Paul Mainieri. If you remember correctly, he's a senior who transferred over in the fall of 2023 from UNC Greensboro. The average did dip a little bit for him as it went from 340 at UC Greensboro to 260 at South Carolina. If he can get up into that 280 range, I think that he turns into a very, very dangerous hitter. The model of consistency was the quote that I saw from a lot of South Carolina fans. You know what you're going to get with somebody like Kennedy Jones. Terrific leader, fifth-year guy that wants to win. Big glue guy vibes from Kennedy Jones. Moving over to the other side, Blake Jackson. Paul Mainieri said, yeah, he's like, this is a guy that's going to play a ton. He's going to be out there every single day, whether it's at DH or in an outfield spot. He hit 293 with 5 home runs. Hard-nosed, gritty guy that reminds me a little bit of Pete Rose is what Paul Mainieri said. He can run, he can bunt. He's a lefty with SEC-type power. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy that hits double-digit home runs, but I think he can kind of be in that 7 to 8 home runs. Really, really clutch. There's a lot of the little things right. Like I said, Paul Mainieri mentioned bunting, stealing. He can hit home runs for him, as the home runs that he hit were really, really long shots. And then the other one is Evan Stone. He's had another terrific fall as well. 5th-year guy, super unselfish, team-oriented. Started a ton as a sophomore. Junior year, kind of find himself out of the lineup. I think that speaks volume to the program that Paul Mainieri is building, that somebody like him doesn't transfer out. It feels like somebody like him at other programs would have transferred out. Evan Stone is somebody that I'm really, really rooting for to kind of stick it out. I'm excited to kind of see where they play him. I could see one of these 3 guys being 3 outfielders in the DH, with Petrie being at first. I could see Petrie being the DH and some of these guys playing first. Paul Mainieri has a lot of different options that he can go with. And then from there, it's really kind of a mixed bag of what you're going to get from a defensive standpoint. That was South Carolina's biggest Achilles heel last year, was I think the defense, and obviously the hitting with runners in scoring position, which law of averages says you're going to be better with that. But the defense, I think that's something that Paul Mainieri really addressed. He said that this is something that they need to get better at, and I think that exemplifies with Nathan Hall. He's had an impressive fall, 6'3", 200-pound guy that runs extremely well. He's another guy coming over from Clemson. He just never really found his role there, really kind of stood out every time you watched him. Had a great fall. I felt like Monty and I were talking about him a ton in the fall when he was on Monty's graphic before he transferred over to South Carolina. Hit over 330 for him in 87 appearances up at the Cape. He's a guy that's really separated himself in the fall. Paul Mainieri said he's going to be locked in as the center fielder going forward. Let me just pull up a few more notes here. Mashore is another one that I could see kind of playing in right field too, as well, as he's coming over from St. Mary's. Another bat that I really, really like that stands out when I watch some of that St. Mary's film. He's a guy that I think is really, really elite going forward. There's a lot to like about him. Again, like we've talked about with a lot of these SEC schools that have kind of spots open, whoever ends up winning the job is going to win the job because they're elite at hitting, elite at playing defense, and they play the style that they have. I know that there's a lot of talk about, what's different about Paul Mainieri versus the coach that was there last year. What did Paul Mainieri do at LSU that made him so successful? I think that the thing that made him so successful is the unselfish play. I mean, I remember watching some of those Kramer Robertson teams. It always felt like they were looking to take the extra base. They were hitting and running. They were bunting. I think that that's going to be the one thing that you can expect from the South Carolina team going forward, is they are going to bunt more. As we jump back into our slides, here is where we have South Carolina. I do apologize for how small the graphic is. We have them 9th. D1 has them 15th, so we have them a little bit higher. I believe a lot in the pitching staff that they have. I know there's a ton of unknowns. It feels very similar to what we had in 2024. A lot of unknowns. there's a lot of veteran guys that you just expect to have better seasons, be more clutch. I think Paul Minori is instituting a work ethic at South Carolina that really wasn't there before. It's not to say that guys didn't work hard, but it feels like under Paul Minori, everything is magnified. One of the quotes that I got was, "Tomorrow is the greatest day in Carolina baseball history." Yesterday's history is another one of their ones, but tomorrow is the greatest day in in Carolina baseball history. That's the mantra of this team, is to just get better every single day. And it really wouldn't surprise me to see Paul Maneri kind of build this into a great team. Here is where I have South Carolina. I think that they have the ability to host. That's where I have their ceiling, is host going to Omaha. It's been a while since they've been to Omaha. I know they used to be a mainstay there before. I think if they can host, that'll go an absolutely long way. It'll get the fans kind of bought in for them. Like Oklahoma, I think they're going to be a 2 seed going forward. They're going to get put into an ACC or an East Carolina regional, and hopefully they can go in and dominate it. As I know they kind of they've been snake bitten in the postseason. A lot of their bad luck has been in the postseason, so I'm really excited to kind of see them get into the tournament again. Obviously, if things go bad, they can miss the tournament. I don't think that they will miss the tournament, and if you were to make me do it, obviously the 2 seeds where I'm going to have them. That is all we have time for here. I hope everybody appreciates the Oklahoma and South Carolina deep dives. I'll have some clips out. I'll get this on Spotify too as well. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Are making a little bit of a tweak on the schedule going forward. Next week is going to be Texas A&M and Texas. The following week it is going to be Tennessee and Vanderbilt. I just made a tweak as Tennessee is going to switch with Vanderbilt, so I can do a Texas A&M and Texas episode. So everybody be on the lookout for that one. I'm really, really excited to talk about those two teams going forward. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.